Hey guys, so today I am back to talk about bleeds in Path of Exile 2, and specifically talking about how to scale it. Now, there have been a lot of you guys asking for this video, so hopefully this video ends up being one that you enjoy and learn a lot from. But what I will say is, I'm assuming the people who are asking for it probably want to make a bleed build, and unfortunately, bleeds are really not in the best place in the game right now. Now, as you can see on the bottom here, it says issues with bleed and mostly bugs. And that really is what it comes down to. There's a lot of issues with bleed right now, and there are quite a few bugs that go along with that, making bleeds not as viable as some of the other damage sources in the game. But regardless, let's get into this. So the first thing you need to understand about bleed damage is, unlike other ailments like ignite or poison, well, kind of poison, but unlike other ailments like ignite, shock, freeze, like those types of ailments, bleed is not something that you can get just by doing a certain form of damage. It doesn't just come by using a skill that has like fire damage to do ignites, right? You need to have the ability to bleed to be able to inflict bleed damage. And what that can come from is, things like on the tree, you have nodes that say like, oh, chance to inflict bleeding on hit, right? Chance to inflict bleeding on hit, and you can find these nodes in a couple locations on the tree, but there's that's kind of the way that you inflict bleeds. You need to have the ability to inflict bleeds to begin with, and there are ways to get your bleed up to 100 or as close to 100 as possible just by on the tree, and also various other equipments and items. Some items will be like, oh, increased chance to inflict bleeds, or you can have an item like this one right here, the blood thorn, which just says causes bleeding on hits. So you need a way to inflict bleeds on your enemy, unlike other kind of ailments, which kind of come built into skills or just built into kind of like tree nodes and things like that. So you do need to be able to do that first. Now, you've gotten past that hurdle, right? You're able to bleed. Well, how do I scale that bleed damage? So there's a couple ways to do it, and there's a little bit less than some of the other ailments, but we'll go into that. First one has to do with physical damage from the initial hit, and that works with crits and reducing armor to increase the amount of damage that you do to that physical damage. Now, I think first off, we should understand what causes bleeds, kind of like how we think about what causes poisons and other things. So it says right here, bleeding is an ailment that deals physical damage over time and lasts 5 seconds by default. Damage from bleeding bypasses energy shield. And bleeding deals an extra 100% damage when the our target is moving or if the bleeding is aggravated. So in that sense, if you're not doing physical damage, you are not going to be making the enemy bleed. But there is an exception that if you are a blood mage, you can inflict bleed regardless of whether or not you do physical damage. So it says right here, blood barbs. Gain 10% of damage as extra physical damage. Elemental damage also contributes to bleeding magnitude. So if you have this ascendancy of blood mage and you take blood barbs, then you can start inflicting bleed regardless of whether you're using physical damage or elemental damage. But if you don't have that ascendancy node, then you are only going to be inflicting bleeds with physical damage. And as a result, the only way, well, not the only way, but one of the ways that you're going to be increasing your damage from your bleeds is by increasing your damage from the initial hit, much like any other damaging ailment in the game, whether it be poison, whether it be ignite, any other damaging ailment in the game works the same way. The bigger your initial hit, the more damage you're going to do to the enemies. And you could get that by increasing your physical damage, of course. Also by if you're hitting a critical, so that'll increase the amount of damage you do. And also if you reduce the enemy's armor, because physical damage is mitigated by armor. So if you're using something like vulnerability, for example, on the enemy, that will reduce the enemy's armor. And as a result, you will also be inflicting a bigger hit. And also as a result, doing a bigger bleed. So that is how you increase your damage with bleeds off of the initial hit. Now, the other thing that'll increase your damage for bleeds is bleed magnitude. And again, this is also, you can also get this with ailment magnitude too. Damaging ailments, I think there is a tree thing right here, right? Damaging ailments on enemies, right? Increase the damage of hits against enemies with ailments, and also increase the duration of damaging ailments, and increase the magnitude of damaging ailments. As you can see right here, ailments includes bleed. So those are ways that you can increase your damage with bleed by increasing the magnitude of the bleed and damaging ailments. So we're going to demonstrate that here on our favorite target dummy, and we're going to be using our quarterstaff right here. So let's start by hitting the boss, right? And something you'll notice, and what I want you to keep an eye on, is the difference between the initial hit and the total damage that we do. So that one started about 39 and went to 63 or so for our total damage. So 39 on the initial hit, and it went about 63 after the bleeds. And there's going to be quite a bit of variance sometimes. That one started around like the high 50s, and then it went to 103. And something else to notice is the speed at which it ticks down, because that also is determined by the magnitude, right? So that one started around like 70 or so, went to about 119. So we've, basically we're kind of in this range of like 60 total damage to about 120 total damage. This one went to 130 total damage. We hit about 80 and went to 130. Like high 70s, low 80s, something like that. And 130. That was a crit, so we're not going to count that one. And that one was about low 70s or so, and it's going to be about 120 again, right? 127, yeah. So that's kind of what we're looking at, right? Somewhere between the variance of like 60 damage, which I've even seen it lower actually, go down like 40s, all the way up to like 120 or so, 120, 130. Now let's equip Deep Cuts, which gives us more, 75% more magnitude of bleeding and 25% less damage with hits. So the initial hit's going to do less damage, but the bleeds are going to do more. So there we go. We're going to smack boss, went about low 40s. And as you can see here, the magnitude ticks up much, much higher now, more than doubled, right? So that's going to be around 100 from our low 40s hit. So as you can see, magnitude itself will be scaling the bleed quite well. And that was really, really low of a hit, and we didn't even get that before. So that was about 37 from a hit of like 10-ish damage. Let's try to do another one. 30 damage before. When it was 30, it went about like 70 or so, right? Or I think actually it was like 60, sorry. It was like 60, so that one went to 70. And this one was about 60, and it's probably going to go at about like 130, right? 137. So yeah, as you see, before we went from about a 70 hit to about 130, and now we're doing a hit of 60, and then we're going all the way up to 137. So you can see the magnitude itself does affect the amount of bleeds that we do and how much damage that does. And also you can see from like how fast it ticks as well, that the tick being faster means that we're doing more bleed damage in a smaller period of time. So magnitude, as a result, does increase the amount of damage our bleeds do. Now, next is going to be duration. So this is with every single ailment, basically. But if you increase the duration, and by using temporal chains, you will see that the amount of damage that we do is much, much higher. So you see this one went up to 190. We have pretty much never even gotten close to hitting 190. And just by adding a little bit of duration onto the boss, we were able to get the number much higher. And that was a crit, so we're not going to count that one. That one started about 50 something, right? And this is probably going to take it to like 150, 160 or something is my guess. Oh, even higher, 167, right? So you can see it is increasing the amount of damage that we're doing with the bleeds overall. Even though the initial hit is going to be the same amount of damage, the overall damage from the bleeds is going to be bigger because it is lasting on the boss for longer. Again, this doesn't increase the damage per second, right? The DPS is staying the same, but the overall damage from the hit and the bleed is going to be higher because you are increasing the duration of the bleed ailment. Now, next up is going to be aggravating the boss. Is this spelled correctly? I don't think it's spelled correctly. Aggravating the boss. There we go. Correct spelling there. Aggravating the boss. Now, what is aggravating, right? So in Path of Exile, there is kind of multiple ways to aggravate the boss's bleeding. So first off, let's just take a look at aggravating as a definition, right? Let's take a look at it off of here. Hits may aggravate. Bleeding that has been aggravated always treats the target as moving, dealing 100% extra damage. Now, I know that in Path of Exile, the word aggravated means a specific thing of treating the target as though it was moving, even though it's not moving, right? But because aggravated bleeding and bleeding when a monster is moving is the same exact thing, just for ease of understanding, let's just refer to both of these as aggravated bleeding. So this boss is not a very good way to test that and show that to you guys, but we're going to go to the Crowbell boss, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when the boss is moving / aggravated, they're bleeding. Okay, so we are here at the Crowbell boss, and I will show you what it looks like when we do a normal bleed versus an aggravated bleed, or when we cause the boss to move to increase the amount of bleed damage, right? So that's going to do something around like 86 damage, right? And the pro just kind of like moving a little bit to attacks, I think also counts it as aggravated for like half a second or a split second. But we'll do a couple more tests to show you what happens when the crow just stands still when we're, when we hit it, right? So here we go. I think that one crit actually, so let's actually just redo that one. So here we go, hit it again, right? About 50 damage off the base hit, and then up to like 121. And again, we still have our deep cuts linked to our gem. So this is with the 75% more ailment magnitude, right? The bleeding at magnitude. Let's hit it again. All right. So numbers aren't anything crazy, right? They're just like 100, 130-ish, something like that damage. Okay, actually, let's also do it one more time, because one thing I forgot to make mention is if you can watch the speed at which the bleed ticks down. I mean, I did mention it in the other trial, but it's also important here, because that will show you the difference between normal and non-aggravated, right? So this is how fast it's going to tick down when it's not aggravated or when the boss isn't moving. Now, let's go and hit the boss, and we will move and make him chase us, and you will see there is a big difference. And you can even see it when before I start moving versus after, right? So we're going to hit the boss, you're going to see it's going to tick down, and then as we move, you can see the number just moves way faster, and it goes up way higher, right? So that is what happens when the bleeding is aggravated / when the boss is moving. The number will tick down way, way faster when that happens. So aggravated and making the boss move while it is bleeding will just increase the damage by so much, right? Look at that. It just goes up by way more than anything else that we do. So aggravating the boss will increase the bleed damage by a ton. Now, that is where the good stuff ends, because there is a lot of issues with bleed at the moment. And we're going to demonstrate that again by going back to our favorite boss. So we'll see you there in just a second. So first things first, you have a good idea about what it looks like when a boss is bleeding because it has an aggravated bleed versus non-aggravating bleed fresh in your head right now, right? So we have quite a few uniques, or a couple uniques, that make it so our bleeding is aggravated no matter what. So basically it makes it so that the bosses take bleeding damage as though they were moving, or even there if they're not moving, right? That's what it means to deal aggravated bleeding damage. So let's go and hit the boss right now with just a normal bleed. So as you can see right here, this is kind of how it looks like when you hit the boss with a normal bleed. And you also have like a good idea of kind of what the ranges are for the damage from before. So let's go and put on this right here, Apron of Emirin, to make it so our bleeds are aggravated no matter what. Boom. You'll notice it doesn't really go up by that much. Like, the difference in the speed at which it ticks down is basically the same as before, whether we wear this garb or not. So we'll do one more test right here where we don't wear the garb again, and you will see that it is basically the same thing. Like, it really does not change how much damage that we're doing to the boss. And that's kind of one of the biggest issues about bleeding right now, is that none of the bleeding, you know, making the boss do, you know, take damage from aggravated bleeds on your uniques actually seems to work. And I actually click character select classic, but none of the actual uniques in the game that make bleeds aggravated actually work. So that's a little bit frustrating right now. And it actually is, none of them actually work, because I can show you right here, we have another one of these equipments, the Beetle Bite shoes, that makes enemies in your presence, so when you're there near you, you know, they will take aggravated bleeding damage. That was I think it might have been a crit, so let's redo that one. As you can see, it's still ticking down extremely slowly. It wasn't like before when we did a small hit to the Crowbird and then it started ticking really, really fast when it started moving. It is basically the same exact thing as before, whether we wore the shoes or the chest at all. So it is currently bugged that you cannot use these uniques to aggravate bleeding. The only way to actually get that aggravated effect is to make the boss or the enemy move after you hit them with the bleed. So that's really unfortunate and makes it kind of bad for bleed builds, because for the most part, from what I found and what I was thinking about, a lot of bosses don't really move that much. And also, if you're using like a melee skill to fight a boss, for the most part, you're kind of just standing still and not really making the boss move around, right? You're not making the boss chase you around. So you're really missing a lot of damage when you're not able to aggravate the boss's bleeding at all. The only way to do it is by making it move around, and that's kind of tough, right? When you're trying to hit it with a melee skill. So at the moment, that's bugged and making it so that bleeds are doing less damage than before. And the other problem with bleeds is that even though in the description of bleeds, right, the whole point of bleeds, and Jonathan Rogers also said this in the podcast that he did with Gazzy and DM, he said that bleed is supposed to be an anti-mage mechanic. It's supposed to be something that is used to deal with enemies with energy shield. Hence, damage from bleeding bypasses energy shield.
Can't bleed on energy shield.
If you're running like unless you're breaking the energy shield, your hit's not going to apply bleed on the energy shield, for instance.
I thought that the thing with bleed was it's supposed to bypass energy shield.
It does, but you can only apply a bleed if the hit deals damage to the life pool. So if you're playing CI, you're essentially immune to poison, care, and bleed.
I will take your word for that, but if that is how that works, that is not how that is meant to work.
Yeah, bleed was actually supposed to be like an anti-mage mechanic, not a like, you know, like as in like you can bleed someone past their energy shield. So like that was kind of the idea there.
So you would think that this is really, really good against energy shield, but unfortunately, where it stands right now, bleed does not deal. You cannot deal bleed damage to enemies unless you're hitting them into their life. For example, let's say if an enemy has 100 energy shield, right? And you deal 200 damage. Well, you're getting rid of all their energy shield in that situation. And then you're also dealing bleeds because you've gotten rid of their energy shield and you hit into the life. But let's say an enemy has 100 energy shield and you only deal 50 damage. Well, you don't actually do any bleeds in that situation. So the only time you're actually doing bleeds is when you get either the enemy doesn't have energy shield or you have a hit strong enough to get rid of their energy shield. Hence, being completely counterintuitive, you know, not to the point of what they wanted bleeds to be. So here we go. I'm gonna hit the boss. As you can see, because I did not break the energy shield, I am not inflicting any bleeds at all onto the boss. So until I am able to get rid of the energy shield, right? Let's throw a couple spells at this boss. Until I do that, I can't actually inflict bleeds. All right, so no more energy shield, right? And boom, instantly, we can now bleed. It's really, really bad. So as a result, A, it's not doing the intended thing that bleed is even supposed to be doing, but B, you're losing damage. Even if you do end up breaking the energy shield of the boss, that's minus however much energy shield damage that you would have done into your bleeds, right? So unfortunately, because of various bugs like not being able to aggravate bleeding with equipment and not being able to bleed bosses with energy shields, bleeding, unfortunately, at the moment is just in a pretty dang bad place. And also on top of that, bleeds themselves, there's not much support on the tree. Like pretty much the only way you're going to get bleeds to be a thing on your tree is if you are down here, right? And bleed magnitude is even more rare. Magnitude, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Like they are very, and then like a couple over here too, right? There are very, very limited sources of bleed magnitude. So bleed right now is just not a very well supported damage type, on top of the fact that it's also bugged. So unfortunately, I'd say for most people, if you're trying to go a bleed build, you're probably better off going something else. And like most of the time, you're just, you know, bleed is kind of like an extra damage on top of your main damage and can't really be used as a main source of damage in this game. But that about wraps this video up. Hopefully this video was helpful and informative and educational. And also, you know, hopefully you enjoy these types of videos, right? And if you do, let me know down in the comment section below, as well as, you know, hitting the sub button. That is the best way to support the channel and letting me know that you enjoy what you see and you want to see more. And if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments as well. But I also stream on twitch.tv/misoxshiru every single night starting at 10 p.m. PST. So I'd love to see you guys there and hang out with me. But if you can't make it to the stream, totally understandable. Hopefully I can see y'all on the next video. All right, guys, peace out.